Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. So today what I'm going to be showing you is how you can create a drag and drop upload zone using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. I'll show you how you can do this for one or multiple files. Allow a user to browse for a file in the normal way by clicking on the drop zone and also update the UI with upload progress. So in HTML you need an element that you're going to make the drop zone. In this case, a div, and inside that, I'm embedding a paragraph element that I'm going to update with messages so the user is aware of the upload status. In your CSS, you want to set some dimensions for the drop zone, and if you want the dashed border that you saw in the preview, you can use the dashed border style. Now I'm going to make this div into an element into which you can drop files, and also select the paragraph. So I'll select the drop zone element by its ID, and using the query selector, select the paragraph that is inside the drop zone element. So we want to listen out for a drop event on the drop zone. So with this, we're listening out for something when it's dropped on the element. The default behavior for a file is for the browser to open it. So to prevent that, you call prevent default on the event object, and I'll log to the console when there is an item dropped here. Now, if we try dropping a file into the drop zone at this point, it won't work, and that is because by default an element does not allow items to be dropped into it. So you can see that no event was logged here. So to allow an item to be dropped into the drop zone element, you want to prevent the default behavior of an item that's being dragged over it, which, as you saw, is to open it. So by doing this, you're allowing the drop event to occur. So now we can handle the drop. So the first thing that I want to do is to check if what was dropped is a file. It's important to do this because by default, images and links are draggable. So information about whatever has been dropped is available on the items property on data transfer in a list. So for a single file, it's going to be at index position 0, and I'll check for multiple files in a moment. So the condition is if it's not a file, then I want to throw an error here that will stop code execution in this function, preventing an upload from occurring. And before code execution stops, I'll display a message for the user. Now, the next thing that I want to check for is whether more than one item has been dropped. So to do that, I can check the length of items. If that is greater than 1, then again, we want to stop code execution so the upload doesn't occur. I'll be adjusting this to allow for multiple files after we've covered the solution for a single file. So to test this, I'm going to insert an image element in the HTML because an image is draggable. So I want to check that it's not able to be dropped in the drop zone without an error being thrown. So that it's out the way, I'll set it to appear in the top left-hand corner. So if I try dragging the image into the zone, we get the expected error. If I drag multiple images, we get the appropriate error for that. Now, if I try for a single file, no error, but there's still a problem. What if I drag a folder in? We're not getting an error, but we want one. So to detect if it's a folder, this can't be done directly. There's no property letting you know if it's a folder, but you can do it by proxy. So a way of doing that is to try and pass the file into the file reader. If the onload event it fires, then the file was read successfully. If it's a folder, then it will error. And in that case, we don't want to proceed with the upload. So I'll pass in the file. The file itself is available on the files property on data transfer. And I'm going to listen out for progress on the reading, because I don't need to read the entire file. So if there is progress in the reading enough that I can be sure that it's not a folder, then I can abort the file reading. And after that, I want to transmit the result that it was read as a file, also here, and here the result that it wasn't able to be read. Now I want to wait for the result. So a good use case for doing this with minimal nesting is to embed this process in a promise. So inside the function that I passed in to the promise constructor, you call the resolve parameter to end the promise, passing in the result. So if it's true, then it was read as a file, and false if not. So I can avoid nesting in waiting for the result of the promise by turning this handler function into an async function that allows me to wait for the result of the promise using the await keyword. So because this next bit of code occurs after a wait, it won't run until a result is back from the file reading. And if it turns out that it's not a file, then I want to throw an error and update the UI. So now dragging the image throws an error. Multiple images throw an error, and the folder now throws an error. But if it's a single file, then no error is thrown. And we want to upload the dropped file. So I'll call an upload function, which I'll define here. Now, in some browsers, after the files list on data transfer has been read, it is removed. So to avoid this, you can create a new array before the file reading that is going to contain the files. So spreading in to a new array is effectively placing each file in a comma separated list there, and the file is located at index position 0. So just to check that this is working, I'll log to the console inside the upload function. So as expected, the dropped image is being passed into it. Now we also want the user to be able to select a file by clicking on the drop zone and browsing the file. So I'll place an input element of type file in the drop zone, and I'm going to set its display to none. So what I'm going to do is to simulate a click on the input element when the user clicks on the drop zone. So I need to select the input element. So I want to listen out for a click on the drop zone. And when that occurs, I want to call the click method on the input element and to react to a user selecting a file. You can set a function for onChange, which will fire when the change event occurs. The target on the event is the input element, and the file is available on the file's property in a list. So it will be at index position 0 for a single file, and you want to pass the file into the upload function. So you don't need to add all those checks that you do for a drop to the input element, because an input of type file is designed to accept files only. And now for the upload itself. So first of all, I'll create a form data payload appending the file to it. So with the form data payload, it's possible to attach multiple files, which we'll be adjusting for in a few moments. And also the content type header on the post request will be set automatically to multi-part form data, which is a payload format that is understood across backend environments because it's the same format as a HTML form with file attachments. Now for the upload itself, I'm not going to use fetch because at the time of this recording, it's not possible to track upload progress with fetch. So instead, I'm going to use the XML HTTP request constructor, sometimes referred to as AJAX. In the open method, I'm going to specify that this should be a post request, and I'm going to make the request to a live test API that sends back in its response what you send to it. Now to listen for upload progress, you listen for the progress event on the upload property on the request. So you can calculate progress as the amount loaded so far divided by the total upload size. So every time this function runs, which it will every time there's some progress, I want to update the UI with the current amount of progress. So progress is a value between 0 and 1, and to avoid numbers after the decimal point, you can call toFixed on that. Now I want to check if the progress is at 1, because then the upload is complete and there can be a pause between the upload finishing and the response from the server indicating whether it was successful or not. So during that time, I'll display a processing message for the user. And because there can be a delay between the user dropping or selecting a file and the first upload progress, I'll update the UI with an uploading message as soon as a file is dropped or selected. Now, if a response comes back, then the load event will fire on the request, and we want to check the status code of the response. For this API, it returns a status code of 200 if it was successful. So in that case, I'll update the UI and log the response to the console. So that will be in JSON format on response text. So for that reason, I pass it through json.parse. Now, if there was a problem connecting to the server, then the error event will fire, and I want to update the UI to say that the upload has failed, and I'll also log an error to the console. Now, it's also possible that the server sends a response with a bad status code. So in that case, again, update the UI and log to the console that it was a bad response. And finally, I'll send the request, passing into it as the payload the form data object that we created earlier on. Now, it might be hard to see the upload progress with a regular connection, so I'm going to simulate a slower connection here. So if I drop an image into the drop zone, immediately I'm getting the uploading message, and I got upload progress there just quickly because it's a small file. And if we take a look at the response, the server received the file successfully, and I'll try it via the input element. So again, we're getting the upload progress and then the response back from the server with the file. Now let's adapt this solution to accept multiple files. So first of all, in response to the drop event, I want to check that every item is a file. So to do that, I want to iterate through items, and to make that possible, using array methods, I spread the contents of the items into a new array. This allows me to use the every method. So the every method, it returns a true or false value based upon if the condition in the function you pass into it is true every time. So we want to check if every item is a file, and we want to run the if block if that is not the case. For the length check, that is no longer necessary, so I'll just comment it out. To check to distinguish a file from a folder, I want to wait for multiple promises this time. So by spreading the files into a new array, I can call the map method on it that returns an array of the return values of the function that is passed into it. So I'm going to pass the file reading code into the function in map and set the return value to each new promise that is created, and each file to be read is each file that is passed in to map. So what calling map on this array is going to return now is an array of promises, and we want to wait for the results of those. So you can wait for an array of promises using promise.all. Promise.all will return an array of true or false values, indicating whether each item could be read, and we want to check if every value in that array is true, otherwise throw an error. So we can use the same technique with every that we used earlier. So if not every value is true, an error is going to be thrown. And also, previously, now to the upload function, you want to pass all of the files on the files array into it now, not just the one at index position 0. So all files should be appended to the form data object. I'm using a loop here because this will work both for files in an array or on a list, and I'm going to append inside the loop each time. I'm going to give each item a reference of file and then the value of I plus 1 because it starts at 0. So the first file will be file 1, and the file that should be appended is the file at the current index position of the looping variable. So this will continue until there are no more files on the array or list. So this covers multiple files if they were dropped by the user. So I'll start by checking what shouldn't work. So a folder or an image shouldn't work, but now multiple files should be uploaded successfully. And if we check the response, both files were successfully received by the server and therefore on the files property. Now, just to be on the safe side, let's check what happens with a file and a folder. So as expected, we're getting the cannot be a folder message in the UI. And to allow multiple files via the input element, add the multiple attribute to it. And in JavaScript, all you have to do is pass the entire file list to the upload function. We've already set that up to append all files to the form data object. So let's test that now. Try and upload 2 files again. And if we take a look at the response, the server received both files successfully. And so that is it for this tutorial on creating a drag and drop upload zone. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please consider hitting the like button down below this video. It helps us with the algorithm and others to find the video. And if you'd like to see more content like this from us in the future, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel.